On February 5, 2013, Michael Dell announced he was taking his own company private in a $24.4 billion buyout. The man who had built the most efficient personal computer empire in American history was pulling his name off the public market. The timing was not a coincidence. That same year, global PC sales suffered their sharpest collapse on record. For a decade, the custom-built Dell Tower, a beige or black box sitting beneath the family desk, had dictated how Americans accessed the internet, worked from home, and bought technology. But by 2013, the screen had shrunk. The smartphone had absorbed the daily digital habit. The family desk was gathering dust. The paradox is that Dell did not fail at making computers. They failed because the American market stopped needing the specific type of machine they had perfected. But the real story of Dell is not only the story of a multi-billion-dollar buyout. It is the story of how America learned to buy the future over a 1-800 number, and what happened when the logistics machine that conquered the desktop was trapped by the glass screen in the pocket. Every week, we tell the stories of American devices, platforms, software, stores, and screens that once taught the country what the future felt like, and what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place, in a college dorm room in Austin, Texas in 1984. In 1984, the American personal computer, a computer designed for one person to use directly, usually at a desk or in a home, was a luxury item trapped behind a retail wall. If a family or a small business wanted to enter the digital age, they did not just buy a machine. They bought a curated experience, and they paid heavily for it. The landscape was dominated by IBM, a corporate giant that had legitimized the desktop computer for the office and was pushing it into the home. But this legitimacy came at a steep premium. An IBM PC could cost upwards of $3,000, a staggering sum for a standard household budget. That price was not just paying for the processor, the main chip that performs calculations and executes instructions. It was paying for a massive, inefficient distribution network. Before the internet, Americans bought technology in physical stores. Franchises like Computerland acted as the gatekeepers of the future. A customer walked into a carpeted showroom, spoke with a commissioned salesperson, looked at a limited selection of beige desktop towers sitting on physical shelves, and paid a markup that often reached 30 to 40%. The retail store provided comfort and technical support, but it also bottlenecked access. The supply chain was rigid and slow. A computer was built in a factory, loaded onto a truck, shipped to a regional warehouse, shipped to a local store, and left to sit on a display shelf until someone decided to buy it. By the time that machine reached the family desk, its internal components were already months old, and its price was artificially inflated to feed the middleman. In room 27013 of the Dobie Center, a high-rise dormitory at the University of Texas at Austin, a 19-year-old pre-med student named Michael Dell saw the inefficiency of this system. He did not look at the computer as a magical, untouchable appliance. He looked at it as a collection of standard commodities. The IBM architecture was open. The physical parts, the motherboard, the memory, the power supply, the disk drives, were off-the-shelf components that could be sourced directly. The problem was not the technology itself. The problem was the ecosystem around it. The retail shelf was an unnecessary tax on the American consumer. The greatest American PC empire did not begin with a grand invention in a Silicon Valley garage. It began with the dissection of a rival. Dell started buying excess inventory of IBM PCs from local retail dealers who were desperate to meet strict sales quotas. He brought those machines back to his dorm room, took them apart, and upgraded them. He added more memory, fast temporary storage a computer uses while programs are running, and installed higher capacity floppy disk drives. He then sold these upgraded customized machines directly to local businesses, law firms, and professionals in Austin for significantly less than the retail stores charged. The demand for direct, affordable hardware quickly outgrew the dorm room. By May 1984, Michael Dell dropped out of college and registered a company called PCs Limited. He realized that if he could bypass the dealer network entirely, he could offer unprecedented value to the entire country. But to do that, he had to fundamentally change how Americans bought technology. Before the web browser, the network of the American tech enthusiast was the printed page. PCs Limited began taking out black and white advertisements in the back pages of computer trade magazines. The proposition in those ads was radical. Do not go to a store. Do not talk to a salesman. Look at the grid of specifications on the page. Pick up a telephone, dial a toll-free 1-800 number, and read your credit card digits to a stranger in Texas. This was a massive leap of faith. In the mid-1980s, mail-order shopping was for clothing or novelty items, not complex, expensive electronics. A personal computer was an intimidating investment. The idea of ordering a machine unseen, trusting that a heavy cardboard box would eventually arrive intact on the front porch, required a fundamental shift in consumer trust. To bridge this gap, PCs Limited had to offer something the retail stores could not: exact customization and aggressive pricing. Because Dell only built the computer after the customer called and placed the order, there was no stagnant inventory gathering dust in a warehouse. This was the birth of the built-to-order model in the American PC market. In 1985, the company released its first computer of its own design, the Turbo PC. It featured an Intel 8088 processor running at 8 MHz, faster than IBM's standard offering at the time, and it was priced at just $795. An equivalent machine on a retail shelf would have cost over $2,000. The shock to the market was immediate and profound. The phones in the Austin office began to ring constantly. By eliminating the retail markup, managing a hyper-efficient inventory of loose parts, and selling directly to the end user, PCs Limited grossed more than $73 million in its first year. The beige box had been democratized. The business model was brutally efficient. If a new, faster hard drive, a storage device that keeps files, software, and operating systems even after power is off, became available from a supplier on a Tuesday, Dell could offer it to customers on Wednesday. The retail stores, bogged down by months of old, pre-assembled inventory, could not react fast enough. The direct sales logistics machine was working. Small offices, school computer labs, and eventually families realized they did not need a showroom. They just needed the hardware at the right price. The company soon changed its name to Dell Computer Corporation. The dorm room operation had successfully bypassed the middleman. They had proven that American consumers would buy complex hardware over the phone, reading specs from a magazine. The middleman had been bypassed, but to conquer the desktop, Dell had to prove that an American family could build their own future before it even left the factory. By the mid-1990s, the American technology landscape was defined by physical retail warfare. Giants like Compaq, IBM, and Packard Bell fought brutally for shelf space inside big-box electronics stores like CompUSA, Circuit City, and Best Buy. To win, these companies had to manufacture hundreds of thousands of computers, pack them into branded boxes, load them onto freight trucks, and park them in regional warehouses. A personal computer in 1995 was a ticking time bomb of depreciation. Every week, a machine sat in a stockroom. The processor inside it became less cutting edge, and the memory became cheaper on the open market. The traditional tech empire was paying to store machines that were quietly losing value before the customer even walked down the aisle. Dell bypassed this entirely by mastering a concept called just-in-time manufacturing, a logistics system where physical components arrive at the factory exactly when they are needed for assembly, rather than sitting in storage. In Dell's massive manufacturing plants in Central Texas, a motherboard, the main circuit board that connects all the computer's internal components together, did not meet an Intel processor until an American consumer had already committed to paying for the final machine. The strategic advantage was invisible to the user, but mathematically devastating to rivals. While Compaq held months of inventory, Dell held days. If the global price of a hard drive dropped on a Monday, Dell could lower the price of a desktop on a Tuesday. The retail brands could not respond without taking a massive financial loss on the machines already sitting on store shelves. The traditional computer companies were selling the past. Dell was assembling the present. The problem for IBM and Compaq was not that they failed to understand Dell's advantage. The problem was that the retail ecosystem trapped them. If Compaq tried to sell directly to consumers over the phone, CompUSA and Best Buy would threaten to drop Compaq from their shelves entirely, severing their primary connection to the American public. Dell had no retail partners to anger. They had built an empire without a storefront. But the true breakthrough, the moment that transformed Dell from a successful mail-order catalog into a generational technology empire, arrived when the catalog moved to a screen. In 1996, the Internet was still a dial-up novelty for most of the country. A user had to connect through a modem, a device that translated digital computer data into analog audio signals sent over standard telephone lines, just to load a text-heavy web page. At this time, Americans were barely comfortable buying a $15 book over the Internet. E-commerce was largely experimental. Yet Dell decided to ask the public to buy a $2,500 custom computer through a web browser. The launch of Dell.com in the summer of 1996 introduced a feature that fundamentally changed how Americans interacted with technology: the online configurator. Before this, buying a computer meant accepting a pre-packaged bundle. If a box at Circuit City had a fast processor but a small hard drive, the customer had to compromise. The Dell.com configurator turned the American consumer into a systems architect. A user sitting at an office desk could load the page, select a base model of a Dell Dimension desktop, and begin interacting with drop-down menus. They could click to upgrade the RAM, the fast temporary memory the computer uses to juggle active tasks like opening applications. They could select a larger CRT monitor, the heavy glass tube display that dominated desks of the era. They could add a CD-ROM drive, an optical disc reader that was suddenly necessary for installing modern software and multimedia encyclopedias. They could even choose whether the factory would pre-install Windows 95 or Windows NT as the operating system. With every click, the total price updated in real time. The psychological effect was profound. The user was not just buying a machine, they were building it. They were taking ownership of the specifications. By early 1997, the result of this digital shift shocked the American tech industry. Dell was generating $1 million in sales every single day directly through its website. They had successfully convinced the public to type a credit card number into a secure web form for an expensive, fragile piece of hardware that would not arrive for another 2 weeks. This system scaled perfectly from the suburban living room to the corporate IT department. A small law firm in Chicago or a public school district in Ohio did not have to send a buyer to a physical store to negotiate a bulk discount on mismatched machines. An IT manager could log into a dedicated corporate portal on Dell.com, configure 50 identical desktop towers with the exact network cards, the internal chips required to connect to local office servers, and click order. The factory in Texas would build exactly 50 machines, no more, no less. The physical arrival became an American business and household ritual. A fleet of delivery trucks would pull up to an office building or a suburban driveway, unloading heavy, brown corrugated cardboard boxes stamped with the blue Dell logo. Inside, the machine was exactly what the user had designed. There was no wasted hardware they didn't ask for, and they hadn't paid a penny to a middleman. By the late 1990s, the industry realized a terrifying truth about Michael Dell's company. Dell was not actually a computer company in the traditional sense. They did not invent new processors. They did not write the Windows operating system. They did not pioneer breakthrough interface designs like Apple. Dell was, at its core, the most ruthlessly efficient logistics and supply chain engine in the history of American consumer electronics. They had commoditized the personal computer. They took standard, interchangeable parts and built a system that moved those parts from a factory floor to a user's desk faster and cheaper than anyone else on Earth. The beige box was simply the physical manifestation of that logistics network. The supply chain was perfected. The American internet was waking up, and Dell was about to put a custom-built box in millions of living rooms. By the dawn of the 21st century, the American technology market was reeling from the dot-com crash. While Silicon Valley software startups evaporated overnight, the hardware logistics engine in Central Texas only accelerated. In 2001, Dell officially bypassed Compaq to become the largest personal computer manufacturer in the world. They achieved this not by inventing a fundamentally new type of computing, but by perfecting the delivery of the existing one. The physical aesthetic of the American desk was changing, and Dell was dictating the color palette. The generic beige boxes of the 1990s were replaced by the midnight gray and black plastic of the Dell Dimension series. These heavy, utilitarian towers became the default architecture of the American Internet transition. A standard configuration in 2002 featured an Intel Pentium 4 processor, the newly released Windows XP operating system, a massive CRT monitor, and a CDRW drive. An optical drive that allowed users not just to read software disks, but to burn their own downloaded MP3 music files onto blank CDs. In an American house where the family computer once sat in a shared room, the right device did not merely run software. It decided who could go online, who could talk after school on instant messengers like AIM, who could burn a mix CD, who could work from home, and who felt that the future had finally arrived. The arrival of a Dell box on a suburban porch was a recognized event. The unboxing process was a tactile, anticipated ritual, cutting the heavy packing tape, pulling away the static-charged styrofoam, placing the heavy tower on the carpet beneath the desk, and routing the thick VGA display cable from the monitor to the back of the machine. These computers were the vessels for a massive cultural shift. They were the machines that connected millions of American homes to early broadband internet. High-speed, always-on digital connections that replaced the screeching dial-up modems of the previous decade. To cement this dominance, Dell launched a television advertising campaign in the year 2000 that embedded the brand permanently into the American lexicon. The commercials featured an enthusiastic, blonde-haired slacker teenager named Steven, appearing on screens during NFL football games, MTV music video blocks, and primetime sitcoms. Steven would crash through the fourth wall to assure parents and students that buying a custom PC was easy. He ended the commercials with a singular catchphrase, "Dude, you're getting a Dell." The marketing was brilliant because it masked the cold, hyper-efficient reality of the supply chain behind a friendly, colloquial face. It made the act of ordering a custom-built, logistics-optimized piece of hardware feel like a casual, exciting cultural moment. The phrase was repeated in high school hallways, late-night talk shows, and college campuses across the country. By the fall semester of 2002, the American College dorm room was a showroom for Dell's direct sales model. Students no longer drove to a local CompUSA or Best Buy to purchase a generic machine for school. They logged onto the Dell portal over the summer, selected their exact specifications, and had the customized boxes shipped directly to their university mailrooms. Universities even set up specialized purchasing portals on Dell.com, offering student discounts and preloaded campus software. The direct pipeline from the Texas factory to the dorm room desk was flawless. While the Dimension series conquered the living room, a parallel product line called the Optiplex conquered the American office cubicle. From Wall Street trading floors to Midwest public libraries, from government agencies to Fortune 500 headquarters, the black and silver Optiplex towers were ordered by the thousands. Corporate IT departments, the teams responsible for managing and repairing business technology infrastructure, revered Dell. If a hard drive failed in a Chicago office, Dell's logistics network could have a replacement part on a technician's desk by the next morning. The physical standardization meant an entire floor of employees was using the exact same motherboard, the exact same drivers, and the exact same software image. It was peak corporate efficiency. The scale of Dell's operation by the mid-2000s was unprecedented in American consumer electronics. The company was not just manufacturing computers, they were defining the physical landscape of the American digital transition. The Dell logo was no longer confined to heavy desktop towers. It began appearing on laptops, portable computers that folded shut, combining a keyboard, screen, and battery into one unit. The Dell Inspiron laptop series brought the direct sales model out of the home office and into college backpacks, coffee shops, and airport lounges. The logo appeared on flat-panel LCD monitors, slim, liquid crystal displays that replaced the heavy, heat-generating glass tubes of the past, instantly clearing up precious space on family desks. There were Dell-branded inkjet printers, Dell digital projectors, and even the Dell Axim, a popular PDA, a personal digital assistant used for managing contacts, calendars, and notes before the smartphone era. The company leadership believed that their logistics network was invincible. If a product had a circuit board and a battery, Dell could source it cheaply in Asia, bypass the physical retail store, and ship it directly to an American front porch. But the absolute core of the empire remained the Windows desktop machine. This was the peak of the Intel era, the dominant industry alliance where Intel provided the internal processors and Microsoft provided the Windows operating system. Dell was the ultimate frictionless delivery vehicle for this alliance. They did not have to spend billions of dollars in research and development to invent a new operating system. They did not have to engineer proprietary silicon chips. They simply had to build a plastic and metal enclosure, integrate the standard parts faster than HP or Gateway, and deliver it cheaper. By 2005, Dell reached a staggering milestone. They controlled nearly one-third of the entire American personal computer market. 1 out of every 3 computers purchased in the United States came from a Dell factory. The company's revenue approached $50 billion. The stock price was soaring. The dorm room experiment had become a global leviathan. For a generation of American students, their entire educational infrastructure ran on this hardware. Public school computer labs, rooms filled with rows of identical black towers, glowing monitors, and tangled mice cables, were almost exclusively Dell territory. When a student sat down to learn early web research, type an essay, or play educational software, they were doing it on a machine built to order from Texas. The manufacturing process itself had become an American industrial marvel. In massive fulfillment centers in places like Lebanon, Tennessee, or Austin, Texas, the assembly lines operated with military precision. An American customer clicked the final confirmation button on the website, and within minutes, a unique barcode was generated on the factory floor. Workers had only minutes to pull the specific memory chips, hard drives, and graphics cards from nearby inventory bins. The standard components were slotted into a generic chassis, screwed together, briefly powered on for a diagnostic test, boxed in brown cardboard, and pushed onto a waiting FedEx truck. A machine could go from a website click to a shipping manifest in a matter of hours. The traditional American tech aisle at Circuit City and Best Buy, the big box retailers that once controlled access to the future, looked increasingly irrelevant for serious computer buyers. Why buy a stagnant, pre-packaged machine off a physical shelf when a custom-built dimension could arrive in days? The physical stores were left selling budget models, cables, accessories, and boxed software. The premium desktop market belonged entirely to the 1-800 number and the online configurator. Yet the sheer magnitude of this logistics machine required absolute, ruthless cost-cutting to maintain its profit margins. The supply chain was optimized for ultimate standardization. It thrived on cheap, modular, easily interchangeable components. The genius of the model was that a Dell PC was assembled with the speed and uniformity of a fast food order. The system was flawless as long as the American consumer continued to want a standardized plastic box. The desktop belonged to Dell, but the strength of being the ultimate middleman was about to become a trap. The first crack in the empire was almost invisible. It did not start with a massive drop in sales, a sudden bankruptcy, or a dramatic platform shutdown. It started with a change in the physical material of the computer itself. For a decade, Dell had dominated because they mastered force one of the American tech market: hardware, supply chains, and manufacturing costs. Their entire logistical miracle relied on absolute standardization. The system worked perfectly when a computer was just a collection of generic circuit boards, standard hard drives, and modular memory sticks screwed into a beige or black plastic chassis. But by the late 2000s, the American consumer's relationship with the computer was shifting. The heavy desktop tower was no longer the center of gravity. The laptop was taking over. And the laptop was not just a utilitarian tool, it was a highly visible, portable object of design. When Apple began aggressively pushing the MacBook, eventually moving to a unibody aluminum enclosure milled from a single piece of metal, the physical rules of hardware changed. Apple's supply chain was built to manufacture millions of identical premium, heavily integrated devices where the battery, keyboard, and screen were fused into a seamless object. Dell's supply chain was built to assemble millions of uniquely configured modular plastic devices. That strength would later become the trap. Dell could not easily configure a premium, unibody aluminum laptop on the fly the way they configured a plastic dimension desktop. If an American user wanted a custom graphics card in a razor-thin metal chassis, the just-in-time assembly line broke down. The logistics machine that had crushed Compaq and IBM was fundamentally misaligned with the new era of consumer electronics. Furthermore, the magic of the online configurator was fading. In the late 1990s, carefully selecting the exact speed of a processor or upgrading from 128 megabytes to 256 megabytes of memory meant the difference between a machine that worked and a machine that froze. But by 2007, standard baseline specifications were suddenly good enough for everyday tasks. A user buying a computer for casual web browsing, email, and social networks no longer needed to meticulously architect their system. They just wanted a machine that looked good and worked instantly. The custom build process, once Dell's greatest weapon, started to feel like an unnecessary chore. To keep their massive factories running and maintain their market share against rising Asian manufacturers, Dell was forced into a brutal race to the bottom. If they could not win on premium design, they had to win on absolute lowest price. They flooded the market with increasingly cheap, flimsy plastic laptops. An American student could buy a basic Dell Inspiron for under $500, but the profit margins on these machines were razor thin. When hardware margins collapse, companies look elsewhere to cut costs. For Dell, that cut happened at the exact point of contact that had built their brand trust: the telephone. In the 1990s, calling Dell for technical support meant speaking to a highly trained technician who could dispatch a replacement part the next day. Corporate IT departments swore by this reliability, but to survive the consumer price wars, Dell aggressively outsourced its home user customer service to overseas call centers. The results were disastrous for the brand's reputation in the American living room. The family who had proudly bought a Dimension desktop in 2001 now found themselves on hold for hours in 2006, trying to fix a broken motherboard on a budget laptop, speaking to representatives who were reading from rigid, unhelpful scripts. The internet, which Dell had used to bypass the retail store, now became a megaphone for consumer rage. Blogs and early consumer forums were filled with horror stories about Dell hell. The frustrating, endless loop of broken hardware, shipped boxes, and failed customer support. The trust that Michael Dell had built by bypassing the middleman was evaporating. The pressure became so intense that Dell had to do the unthinkable. The company that had proudly destroyed the traditional tech retail model was forced to crawl back to it. In 2007, recognizing that their direct sales online growth was stalling, Dell began selling pre-configured computers in physical Walmart and Best Buy stores. The American consumer could once again walk down a big-box retailer aisle and buy a Dell directly off the shelf. But this was not a victory. It was a surrender. On the shelf at Best Buy, a Dell was no longer a magical, custom-built machine ordered from the future. It was just another pre-packaged, budget-priced plastic box sitting next to an Acer, a Toshiba, or an HP. The brand had lost its aura. The product still worked. The market around it had already begun to change. And an even more destructive force was about to arrive. Not from a rival computer manufacturer, but from a screen that fit perfectly inside a pocket. By 2010, the American family desk had been structurally demoted. The force that finally broke the Dell logistics machine was not another computer manufacturer. It was Force 4 of the American tech market: smartphone, cloud, streaming, and convenience displacement. When Apple introduced the iPhone in 2007 and later the iPad in 2010, the definition of personal computing changed completely. For a decade, the Dell Dimension Tower had been the gatekeeper of the digital world. To check an email, update a social network, or read the news, an American user had to walk into a specific room, sit in a specific chair, press a physical power button, and wait for a heavy desktop to boot up. The smartphone broke that physical tether. It moved the internet from the desk to the pocket. The moment the internet lived in the pocket, the heavy specifications of the personal computer stopped mattering to the average consumer. Dell had built a direct sales empire by letting consumers architect their own systems, choosing between a 250 gigabyte or a 500 gigabyte hard drive. But as the American digital habit migrated to a cloud service, a system that stores and processes data on remote servers instead of on a local device, local storage became irrelevant. Users were streaming music on Spotify instead of downloading MP3s. They were keeping their photos on Facebook instead of saving them to a local drive. The desktop computer no longer needed massive, customized processing power. For the average user, it just needed enough power to open a web browser. When the computer became merely a glass terminal for a browser window, the American upgrade cycle collapsed. In 2002, a family replaced their Dell every 3 years because new software physically demanded faster hardware to function. By 2012, a 5-year-old budget laptop could still run Google Chrome perfectly fine. Consumers simply stopped buying new machines. Global PC shipments plummeted, and Dell's hyper-efficient factories suddenly found themselves building hardware for a shrinking market. Dell desperately attempted to pivot to the new reality. They released a line of mobile devices, including the Dell Aero and the Dell Venue smartphones. They failed immediately. The American carrier shelf, the physical display space inside AT&T or Verizon stores that decided which phones consumers actually bought, was already firmly controlled by Apple and Android. Dell's logistics magic did not apply to the mobile ecosystem, where locked-in app stores and software ecosystems mattered far more than the cost of the plastic hardware. The American tech habit had permanently shifted. The desktop was no longer the command center of the home. It was relegated to a dusty corner, turned on once a month to do taxes or print a document. The laptop became a secondary device, opened only when the smartphone screen was too small for heavy typing. The direct sales empire had perfected the assembly and delivery of a machine the country no longer urgently needed. This was the brutal environment that forced Michael Dell's hand in February 2013. The massive $24.4 billion buyout to take the company private was not a victory lap. It was a retreat from the glare of Wall Street. The consumer PC market was actively dying, and the company needed to hide from public quarterly earnings reports while it desperately transitioned away from the American living room and into the invisible world of enterprise servers and corporate data centers. The era of selling the customized future in a brown cardboard box to the American teenager was over. The logistics machine kept running, but the culture had moved on. The screen shrank. The specs stopped mattering. The apps moved to the cloud. The tower gathered dust. The pocket became the center. The desk was left behind. The Dell brand did not die. In fact, strictly as a financial entity, the 2013 buyout was a massive historic success. Michael Dell successfully pulled his company out of the brutal, collapsing consumer PC market and pivoted hard into the enterprise. Dell acquired the data storage giant EMC in 2015 for $67 billion, one of the largest technology acquisitions in history. Today, Dell Technologies is a staggering powerhouse of the American corporate backend. Their black servers and massive storage arrays fill heavily air-conditioned data centers across the country, quietly routing the internet, managing cloud databases, and powering the very smartphone apps that made their desktop computers obsolete. But a server rack in a secure, windowless facility is invisible. It has no cultural gravity. The Dell that once defined the American digital experience, the company that taught a generation how to architect their own machines over the internet, no longer exists in the cultural imagination. The slogan is gone. The commercials are forgotten. What survives of that empire is purely physical. If you walk into an American thrift store, a Goodwill electronics section, or an e-waste recycling center today, you will find the ruins of the direct sales empire. There are mountains of Dell Dimension and Dell Optiplex towers, their beige and midnight gray plastic faceplates scratched and yellowing. They are stacked on metal shelves, stripped of their hard drives, their bulky power cords wrapped tightly around their metal chassis. To the average consumer, they look like worthless junk, the heavy, outdated anchors of a slow, dial-up past. But a massive and growing community of American tech preservationists, retro PC builders, and vintage gamers actively hunt for these specific boxes. On dedicated forums, Reddit communities, and eBay, late 1990s and early 2000s Dell desktops are carefully restored, cleaned, and traded. Enthusiasts seek out exact models, like the Dimension 4100 or the XPS Gen 2, to rebuild authentic Windows 98 and Windows XP gaming machines. A popular trend in the custom PC building community is the sleeper PC, taking an old, boring, standard beige Dell chassis from 1999, completely hollowing out the inside, and installing cutting-edge liquid-cooled modern processors and graphics cards. The outside looks like a forgotten corporate cubicle machine. The inside is a high-powered modern engine. This preservation is not merely nostalgia. Keeping a massive Dell tower alive is a physical argument against the modern era of sealed, disposable technology. Today, an American consumer buys a premium smartphone or a unibody laptop where the battery is heavily glued down, the memory is permanently soldered to the motherboard, and the casing is sealed with proprietary pentalobe screws. The modern device is a black box. You are not meant to open it. You are not meant to understand it. You are only meant to rent it until the battery degrades, at which point you throw it away and buy a new one. The Dell Dimension was the exact opposite. It represented a specific era of American hardware ownership. Dell's famous tool-less chassis design meant that a user did not even need a screwdriver to open the machine. You simply pressed a large plastic button on the top, or pulled a heavy latch on the side, and the heavy metal side panel popped off, exposing the entire green motherboard. Everything was modular. Everything was accessible. The hard drives were held in place by green plastic sleds that could be squeezed and removed with 2 fingers. The IDE ribbon cables, wide, flat gray wires that connected the drives, were easy to trace. If a memory stick failed, you bought a new one and pushed it into the slot until it clicked. If the graphics card was too slow for a new video game, you unscrewed it and slotted in a better one. The user had ultimate authority over the hardware. The Dell box was not a magical, untouchable appliance. It was a machine you owned, maintained, and upgraded with your own hands. In the end, Dell's ultimate legacy was not the invention of a new technology. It was the invention of a new American behavior. Before Dell, buying a computer meant relying on a local salesman to act as the gatekeeper of the future. Dell proved that the middleman was unnecessary. They built a hyper-efficient logistics machine that allowed a teenager in a bedroom or a small business owner in a home office to point, click, and summon customized hardware directly from a factory to their front porch. They commoditized the PC so perfectly that they accelerated its adoption across the entire country. But in doing so, they turned the computer into a basic utility. And once computing became a utility, the market no longer cared about the intricate specs of the box under the desk. The market only cared about the glass screen in their hands. The logistics machine won the desktop war, only to discover that the desktop itself was a temporary battlefield. Somewhere, trapped under a heavy wooden desk in an American basement, a Dell Dimension tower still sits in the dark. The midnight gray plastic is covered in dust. The thick VGA cable is disconnected. The front CD-ROM tray is permanently jammed. The glowing blue power button has not been pressed in a decade. The date, silently guarding the memory of an internet that no longer exists. See you in the next one.